Before we jump into this video, I want to take you on a short journey in your outdoor classroom. So you don't actually have to leave and jut out to your outdoor classroom. I want you to visualize it in your brain. So if this is available to you, go ahead and close your eyes. And I'd like you to think about your outdoor classroom. What do the children enjoy doing in it, or what do you hope the children will enjoy doing inside of it? I want you to find a spot in your outdoor class space to sit down and feel the earth underneath your body. Visualize what that feels like. Maybe the sun is grazing your face and you're just feeling so happy and grateful for being outside today. Now, I want you to think about one of the students in your classroom or one of the children you care for exploring under a log. And they're taking their hands and moving soil and moving the soil around, and they have found something in the earth. It's a worm. So they take the worm, put it into their hand, and they are cupping their hands in front of them. You can see on their face that it is full of joy. They have a huge smile on their face, and they start to run towards you. Now, I want you to really think about your feeling of a child with their hands cupped with a worm inside of it. How does that make you feel? Open your eyes and really think about that feeling. What is that feeling that having a worm be close to your body feel like inside of you? Maybe it makes you feel excited. You're excited to see this wonder that the children are sharing with you. Maybe you're feeling nervous, like you just are icked out by the way worms move and you do not want them close to your body. Or maybe you're feeling other emotions, right? You could be feeling more than those emotions. So in this video today, I want to talk to you about how we can support children in showing and sharing their excitement for worms, and how we can support their learning when it comes to worm handling, and also where we can tell them and how we can tell them what feels good to our bodies and how we can model that for other children as well. So the first step that we really have to be honing in on is that we have to separate our teacher self from our real self. And this kind of feels a little weird, doesn't it? Because when we are teaching, we are our real selves. But we do not want to bring our feelings about the natural world and our fears about the natural world into the classroom. And I know you might be feeling like, okay, well, like, how do I do that? If I see a worm, I'm just going to be out, girl. Like, I can't handle the worm. And I know, I feel that. I have felt that about slugs. Let me tell you, those slugs are icky to me, but I still have to separate my teacher self from my real icked out self. And I'll go through that with you all today later on. So if you're interested in learning more about that, we'll head that way in a little bit. But I want you to think about, if you decide to bring your teacher self, or your real self, I should say, into your teacher self when it comes to worms, that scenario in the beginning that I made you close your eyes and think about, that scenario is going to look different. So let me show you what that might look like if you chose to be fearful of worms.
Ew, I hate worms. No, I don't want to touch it. Get that thing away from me.
So when we call something disgusting or we don't like it, and we tell that to the child and we model that with our face, and we have like that ick face on our face, what that's going to then tell the child is that worms are icky and that they don't really want to be picking up worms either, because you're sharing that they're icky for you, you're modeling that to them, and they might in turn feel icked out by worms and not handle worms, and we don't really want to squash that because they enjoy it. The other thing is if we let children know our true feelings about worms, that we're icked out by them, and we run away from them, they're going to think to themselves, that was kind of funny. When I showed Jen a worm, she ran away. And they might continue to do that to us. And I don't think you would want that in your classroom. I definitely would not want a child running at me with something that I'm scared of. That is just not something I want at all. So I want to show you what it would look like with a teacher filter and telling the child what they can do towards your body to make you feel safe when around worms.
I see you found some worms. You sound excited that you found worms. Can you put the worms down by your chest so I can see them? I don't really feel comfortable touching it or having it in my hand, but I'd like to see it in your hand.
In this one, I was still telling the child my boundary. I was still letting them know where they can put their hands, that in my face is not really an option, but they can put it up underneath their chest or by their chest and show me. I'm still letting them know about my feelings about it, but I'm not letting my feelings run me. I'm not letting my real self and my real thoughts about worms take away from the teaching purpose of what we are doing in the classroom. So whenever we are in the class space, we have to really be considering our teacher hat and where it's showing up and how we are leading in our classroom and what we are teaching children. Just like sticks, we can have different opinions about handling worms. So we can choose to handle worms or we can choose not to handle worms in our classroom. I have had a lot of different co-teachers in my last 10 years of teaching that have shared different opinions about handling worms than I have. I have taught with teachers that said they never want children to handle worms because they don't want them to actually hurt the worm, which is a valid point. We want children to be safe with worms and learn from worms. And their choice was to not allow them to handle worms. I have also worked with teachers that have allowed children to handle worms all the time, up until the point where the worm is like dried out in their hand. So there's a different way of approaching worms, isn't there? And there's a fine line between what feels good to you and what feels good to another teacher. I'm somewhere right in the middle. I want children to be able to handle worms. I don't want to say no to handling worms, but I also want to be thinking about the care and what I am teaching children about caring for animals. So I definitely don't want them to just run with the worm or swing it around. Like, we still want to be thinking this is a living thing that we want to care for. So I'm right in the middle, and I want to go through what that looks like for me and how I set that up in my classroom.
I found a worm. I'm going to hold it gently in my hand and keep my hands open like this. Do you know why I'm doing that? Yes, I want the worm to move around in my hand. Oh, it's okay, worm. I just want to look at you. What do you notice about the worm? What do you see? Yeah, it moves really quietly. This worm looks kind of like whitish, which is interesting, doesn't it? I've noticed this worm wants to go back down on the earth because I see that it's not moving as much. What do you think worms need to survive? Yeah, they need soil to move around. Do they like the sun? What happens on the sunny days? Like, do worms like to lay out like we do and just sunbathe? No, they dig deep, don't they? So I'm going to put this worm gently back into the soil. Bye, worm. I'm going to cover it up with some things so it doesn't get dried out in the sun. That's how I can take care of the worm. If you're not a fan of touching worms, because let's face it, we're not all gonna touch worms with our bare hands, what I would suggest doing is grabbing like a stick and lifting this worm up in the stick and then placing it in a bowl. That way you can still have the experience with the children or the child where you are still a part of that learning and modeling how to take care of the worm and talking to the worm and discussing all those open-ended questions that I modeled before. But that's what I would suggest. And if a child isn't wanting to touch a worm and they want you to do it, that's another way to do that as well. Just bring a bowl out and use a stick and model how they can do that as well.
When we provide guidance for handling worms, we are teaching children valuable skills: kindness, caring, observing skills. We're showing them that they can still have that enjoyment of handling a worm in their hand, and giving them the space to learn about the worm. Obviously, there are times where accidents happen or just experimentation happens and a worm breaks in half and a worm dies or a worm is crushed. There are going to be times like that too. And we don't want to shy away from those kind of conversations with kids, or at least I don't. I don't want to shy away from conversations like that because that's another learning opportunity for them. When a worm gets torn in half, we have a point to make there. How did that happen? I noticed that the worm got torn in half. How does that make you feel? How do you think the worm is feeling? What can we do to care for the worm's body? All those are okay ways to open up a conversation about the worm getting torn in half. Another thing you can do is talk about what they can do next time. How are you going to care for the worm next time? Can you tell me what kinds of hands we use when we're handling worms? All these ways we're teaching and we're guiding and we're helping children to facilitate that knowledge about how to care for a living being, a worm. I have oftentimes received these questions and I felt like I should address them here so then you have new ways of helping to support conversations about worms. So one of the things is, instead of saying, no, I don't want to hold the worm, try saying, I choose to look at the worm in your hand. Can you show me the worm by holding it in your hand? Or if a child is moving their hand too close to your face and you don't want it that close to your face, you have the ability to tell the child where they can put their hands. Can you choose to move your hands down by your chest so I can see? When you have your hands right in my face, I can't see the worm. Another common question I receive is about what to do if a child is dangling a worm or swirling a worm. What do you say then? And you still have your teacher hat on, so you're there to help guide them, remember? So what you can say is, I'm noticing that you're swinging the worm. How does that make the worm feel? Or how do you think that makes the worm feel? Can you show me how we hold worms in our classroom? What is an expected way to hold worms in our classroom? Yes, in our hands like this. That way the worm can move around freely. I notice that you're really interested in swirling the worm. Can we find something you can swirl in our classroom? Do we have string that you can whip around? Is there something else we can use? We're giving them the opportunity to learn what the expectation and the boundary is in handling that worm, that we're not allowed to swing or just like willy-nilly, like give that like worm a roller coaster ride. We're telling them that we actually put them in our hands like this and we model that. And then we're giving them the yes. Where can they swing? Or what can they swing, I should say. What can they swing in our classroom? And finding things they can swing. So we're still honoring that need and desire, but we're doing it safely without worms. If you have further questions or anything that you might want to say about worms or handling worms, feel free to leave a comment below. If you want to reach out to me, you can always do that through my Instagram. That's where I hang out a lot of times. So you can send me a DM and we can chat about it, or you can set up a coaching call with me and we can go through more ideas to help support you in helping children to handle worms appropriately. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you aren't already, subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next week. Bye.